In the heart of the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, in the city of Pella, a child was born who would one day shake the world. It was the year 356 BCE, a time of political ambition, cultural richness, and the restless energy of a kingdom striving to assert itself among the powerful city-states of Greece. The people of Pella were accustomed to the rhythms of royal life, the comings and goings of nobles, the constant hum of political intrigue, the clatter of soldiers drilling in the courtyards, and the soft murmur of philosophers and scholars who wandered the marble corridors. Into this world came Alexander, the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias, and from his very first cries, destiny seemed to lean toward him. Alexander's birth was no ordinary event. The kingdom of Macedonia, though often overshadowed by Athens and Thebes, had become a rising power under the firm and calculating hand of Philip II. Philip was a brilliant strategist and a master of both diplomacy and warfare. His vision was to unite the Greek world under Macedonian leadership, and then look eastward to lands yet unconquered. Olympias, his wife and Alexander's mother, was a woman of fierce intensity, hailing from the royal house of Epirus. She brought with her not only noble blood, but a deep devotion to the mystical and religious traditions of her homeland. Her influence on young Alexander would shape not only his character, but his understanding of destiny, the divine, and the world itself. From the very beginning, Alexander's environment was one of contrasts. The cold discipline of the Macedonian military tempered by the lofty ideals of Greek thought, the harsh realities of palace politics softened by the tender teachings of devoted mentors. Philip, ever aware of the importance of shaping his son into a future ruler, ensured that Alexander was surrounded by examples of courage and wisdom. Olympias, on her part, infused him with stories of heroes, legends of gods, and visions of greatness. The boy grew up with a profound sense that he was marked for something extraordinary. As a child, Alexander displayed an energy and intellect that set him apart. Tales from his early years describe a boy fearless even in infancy, eager to explore the palace gardens, climb the walls, and challenge the grown men who sought to instruct him. Olympias, ever watchful, encouraged his sense of ambition, often telling him that he was destined to conquer and to be remembered through the ages. She spoke of heroes like Achilles, whom she claimed was a forebear of Alexander himself, weaving myth into the very fabric of his identity. The young boy absorbed these stories with a hunger that went beyond mere fascination. They became the blueprint for his emerging worldview, a fusion of imagination, ambition, and a relentless drive toward greatness. Education in Pella was both rigorous and expansive. Macedonian princes were expected to learn the art of war as much as the art of reason. Alexander's tutors, handpicked by Philip, included men of intellect and skill, who could instill in him a foundation in philosophy, science, and leadership. Among the most notable was Leonidas, who guided Alexander in the ways of Macedonian discipline and strategy. But it was the arrival of Aristotle, when Alexander was about 13, that would mark a turning point in his early development, a moment that would forever connect the boy to the great intellectual currents of Greece. Aristotle taught him not only to think critically, but to seek knowledge in all its forms: the natural world, politics, ethics, and literature. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander developed an insatiable curiosity, a thirst for understanding that would accompany him on every campaign, shaping not only his decisions as a general, but his vision of empire. Even in these early years, the tension between childhood and destiny was palpable. Alexander was a boy, yet he was groomed to be a king. He played, yet he studied the art of war. He listened to stories of gods and heroes, yet he watched the real men of Macedonia maneuver with cunning and ruthlessness. These dualities, play and discipline, myth and reality, love and ambition, formed the foundation of his character. It was in Pella that Alexander first learned to balance these forces, to see the world as both a field of opportunity and a stage for legend. Alexander's early life was also marked by family dynamics that would shape his psyche. Philip's marriages, alliances, and political maneuverings were never far from the young prince's awareness. Olympias, with her sharp intellect and unwavering devotion, ensured that Alexander understood his own position and destiny in a world where power was both coveted and contested. The palace was a place of careful observation. Alexander learned to read intentions, to perceive threats, and to navigate the complex social currents of royalty. These skills, honed in the sheltered but politically charged environment of Pella, would serve him well in later years when the stakes were far higher. By the time Alexander approached his adolescence, it was clear to all who observed him that he was extraordinary. His mind was quick, his courage unwavering, and his imagination vast. In Pella, amidst the backdrop of Macedonian ambition and Greek culture, the foundations of one of history's most remarkable figures were being laid. Every lesson, every story, every moment of observation and play contributed to the shaping of a man who would not only follow in the footsteps of kings, but forge his own path across the known world. In Pella, in that year of 356 BCE, a child was born who would grow to challenge empires, inspire legend, and leave a legacy that centuries would struggle to match. As Alexander grew beyond childhood, the foundations laid in Pella were ready to be expanded into a mind capable of both thought and action. At the age of 13, a new chapter of his education began under the guidance of Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of the age. Philip II, recognizing the importance of cultivating not only a strong ruler but a wise one, entrusted his son to the intellectual tutelage of the man who had studied at Plato's academy. Aristotle was not just a teacher. He was a gateway into the world of Greek knowledge, culture, and philosophy. Under his instruction, Alexander explored subjects that would later influence every aspect of his campaigns: logic, ethics, politics, metaphysics, biology, and the arts. Aristotle instilled in Alexander a profound curiosity about the natural world. The young prince learned to classify plants and animals, study their habits, and observe the patterns that governed their lives. These lessons were not abstract. They would later serve him in foreign lands where understanding local resources, climates, and wildlife could mean the difference between success and failure. Aristotle also nurtured Alexander's sense of destiny and greatness, carefully framing the world of myth and history in ways that inspired ambition while teaching strategy and restraint. Homer's epics, especially the Iliad, were a constant reference. Alexander was encouraged to see himself in the mold of Achilles, to aspire to heroic deeds, but also to temper courage with intelligence. Education under Aristotle was rigorous, but Alexander's mind was equally sharp. He absorbed knowledge quickly and often questioned his teacher, displaying a blend of humility and boldness rare for someone of his age. Philosophy taught him to think critically. History showed him the consequences of decisions, and science revealed the mechanisms of the world around him. In Pella's palace, every lesson became part of a larger preparation, the making of a ruler who would command not only armies, but ideas, capable of understanding the lands he would one day conquer, as well as the people who lived there. While his intellectual education flourished, Alexander was also groomed for the practical realities of power. Philip ensured that his son was exposed to the art of warfare at an early age. Macedonian princes were expected to be skilled in combat, horse riding, and military strategy, and Alexander proved himself exceptional. By his early teens, he was already training with soldiers, learning the discipline of the phalanx, the precision of archery, and the tactics of cavalry maneuvers. These lessons were far more than exercises. They were tests of courage and intelligence, designed to reveal who could endure the rigors of leadership on the battlefield. At 16, Alexander's prowess began to show in more formal military roles. When Philip was campaigning in Thrace, Alexander was left in charge of Macedonian forces in Macedonia itself. This was a bold move for a young prince, but Alexander demonstrated the judgment, leadership, and charisma that would later define his command. He conducted campaigns against rebellious tribes, not as a boy seeking glory, but as a strategist with a vision. These early military experiences exposed him to the realities of logistics, morale, and diplomacy. He learned that victory depended not only on bravery, but on careful planning, adaptability, and understanding the human element of war. Simultaneously, Alexander's personality began to take shape. He was fearless yet disciplined, ambitious yet loyal to his companions, curious yet commanding. His combination of intellect and courage impressed not only his family, but the generals and soldiers who observed him. Olympias, ever aware of the boy's potential, continued to encourage his belief in destiny, ensuring that he understood both his noble lineage and the extraordinary path laid before him. Philip, though stern and politically astute, recognized that Alexander's spirit was unique. He nurtured it carefully, balancing praise with challenge, allowing the young prince to grow confident yet cautious. These formative years created a man of rare duality, a student and a warrior, a dreamer and a realist. Alexander's mind was sharpened by philosophy and science, his body honed by rigorous military training. His early campaigns, though small in scale, taught him the essence of leadership: decision, responsibility, and courage under pressure. By the time he reached his late teens, he was no longer merely a prince. He was a leader in training, a young man prepared to inherit a kingdom, to command armies, and to eventually embark on ambitions that would stretch far beyond Macedonia's borders. Thus, the period of education under Aristotle, combined with youthful military experience, was the crucible in which Alexander's character was forged. Knowledge and action intertwined to create a vision that was both practical and visionary. The boy from Pella, guided by the wisdom of the ages and tempered by the realities of war, was preparing to step onto a stage that would one day encompass the known world. Every lesson learned, every challenge overcome, and every early campaign fought laid the groundwork for the extraordinary life that was soon to unfold. The year was 336 BCE, a year that would forever alter the course of history. Alexander, barely 20 years old, stood at the precipice of destiny. The world around him was turbulent. Macedonia had grown powerful under his father, Philip II, but the kingdom was also a nest of political intrigue, ambition, and danger. Philip had united much of Greece through a combination of military prowess and shrewd diplomacy, preparing the stage for an invasion of Persia. But fate intervened abruptly. In the theater of Aegae, the ancient capital of Macedonia, Philip was assassinated. The sudden violence of that act sent shockwaves through the royal court and across the Greek world. For Alexander, the moment was both tragic and decisive. He was still young, but his upbringing, education, and military experience had prepared him for leadership in ways few could match. With the Macedonian army at his back and the loyalty of key generals secured, Alexander moved swiftly to claim the throne. In the months following Philip's death, he acted decisively to eliminate potential rivals, consolidating his power with a combination of strategic alliances and calculated displays of force. Olympias, his mother, played a key role, protecting her son's position and ensuring that any threats within the royal household were neutralized. The young king's accession was not merely a matter of inheritance, it was a test of character. Macedonia was a kingdom built on loyalty, fear, and respect, and Alexander understood that his rule depended on the army as much as the throne. He addressed the troops with the confidence of a seasoned commander, inspiring trust, even as he demanded absolute obedience. His charisma, intelligence, and courage quickly convinced the Macedonians that the young prince could succeed, where even Philip might have struggled. By the end of 336 BCE, Alexander had secured the crown, his authority recognized across the kingdom, though the challenges ahead were far from over. No sooner had he become king than Alexander faced the enormous task of consolidating Macedonian power and maintaining the fragile unity of Greece. Philip's campaigns had left Greece under Macedonian influence, but the Greek city-states, proud of their independence and steeped in centuries of rivalry, were restless. The murder of Philip emboldened factions within Athens, Thebes, and other city-states, who saw an opportunity to reassert autonomy. Alexander's response was both swift and calculated. He combined diplomacy with strategic military action, making alliances where possible and demonstrating force where necessary. The speed and decisiveness of his actions left little room for opposition, signaling to all that the new king was both intelligent and ruthless. In particular, Alexander understood that maintaining control over Greece required a balance of fear and respect. He allowed some city-states to retain a degree of autonomy, ensuring they recognized Macedonian leadership while not provoking rebellion unnecessarily. At the same time, he was unflinching in punishing defiance. His approach was precise, swift action against the few who resisted, and fair treatment for those who submitted, creating an image of both strength and justice. By the end of 335 BCE, Alexander had firmly established Macedonian dominance, securing his position as the unquestioned leader of a kingdom poised for conquest. During this period, Alexander also turned his attention to the army and the administration of his realm. He reorganized the Macedonian military, ensuring loyalty among the troops, refining tactics and preparing his generals for the campaigns that lay ahead. Macedonia had been built on a military foundation, and Alexander's skill lay not only in leading men, but in understanding the logistics, morale, and strategy that sustained a successful army. He also began to cultivate relationships with Greek intellectuals and leaders, reinforcing his legitimacy as a ruler who combined martial skill with wisdom. But consolidation of power was not only about Greece itself, it was about projecting authority. Alexander sent a clear message to the wider world. Macedonia was strong, united, and ready to act. Even distant powers that had once underestimated the kingdom began to take notice. His swift and decisive handling of the transition from Philip to himself showcased a leadership style that combined inherited power with earned respect. By neutralizing internal threats and managing the Greek city-states with a mixture of diplomacy and strength, Alexander laid the groundwork for a kingdom capable of launching unprecedented campaigns. These early years as king also reveal much about Alexander's character. He was bold and ambitious, aware of both the opportunities and dangers that surrounded him. He displayed strategic brilliance, balancing immediate military and political necessities with long-term objectives. Above all, he understood the psychology of power, that loyalty was won through respect and fear in equal measure, and that a ruler who hesitated could quickly become a victim of intrigue. The young king, who had once been a student and a soldier, now became the architect of a vast vision, preparing not only to defend Macedonia but to extend its influence across the known world. By the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander had completed this crucial phase of consolidation. Macedonia was secure, the Greek city-states were largely compliant, and the army was ready. The stage was set for his legendary campaign against the Persian Empire, the first steps in a journey that would transform a young Macedonian prince into a figure remembered for millennia. The accession to the throne and the consolidation of power in Greece were more than milestones. They were the crucible in which Alexander's leadership, strategic genius, and indomitable will were fully tested and proven. Thus, these years from 336 to 334 BCE demonstrate how a young man barely out of his teens could command respect, enforce unity, and prepare a kingdom for the extraordinary conquests that lay ahead. In securing Macedonia and asserting dominance over Greece, Alexander proved that he was not merely his father's heir, but a king capable of shaping history itself. The world, as yet unaware, was about to witness the rise of one of the greatest conquerors the earth had ever known. By 334 BCE, Alexander was no longer just a king consolidating his power. He was a conqueror with a vision that stretched far beyond the borders of Macedonia. His goal was clear: to challenge the Persian Empire, the vast and wealthy realm that had long dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Years of preparation had gone into this campaign. The Macedonian army was trained, equipped, and motivated, combining the legendary discipline of the phalanx with the shock power of cavalry. Alexander's generals and soldiers, many of whom had fought alongside him in previous campaigns in Thrace and against rebellious Greek factions, were fiercely loyal. Each man understood that they were part of something extraordinary, a campaign that promised not just victory, but immortality in the annals of history. Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, leaving the familiar landscapes of Greece and Macedonia behind. The journey itself was symbolic, a deliberate entry into the lands of the Persian kings, territories that had long been seen as unconquerable by any Greek or Macedonian force. The crossing was more than a logistical operation. It was a psychological statement. Alexander wanted his men to understand that there was no turning back, that they had entered a theater where only courage, skill, and unity would allow them to survive and thrive. The Macedonian army, numbering around 35,000 men, moved swiftly and with purpose, a small but well-trained force prepared to take on the empire of Darius III. The first significant test of Alexander's campaign came at the banks of the Granicus River, near the western coast of Asia Minor. The Persian satraps, aware of the Macedonian advance, had gathered a large force of cavalry and infantry to block the crossing. The river itself presented a formidable natural barrier, with steep banks and swift currents that could disrupt any attacking force. Alexander, ever bold, recognized the challenge not as a deterrent, but as an opportunity. Victory here would not only secure a foothold in Asia Minor, but would also send a message to the Persian Empire. Alexander was a commander unlike any they had faced. The Battle of Granicus was fierce and decisive. Alexander personally led the charge, riding at the front of his companion cavalry. the elite unit of his army. His presence inspired his men, who followed with unyielding courage despite the dangers of charging across a river under enemy fire. The Persian forces, confident in their numbers and position, were taken aback by the speed, coordination, and ferocity of the Macedonian attack. The clash was brutal. Swords rang against shields, arrows darkened the sky, and the river became a chaotic battleground. Yet Alexander's strategy was precise. He targeted the Persian leaders, understanding that the morale of their forces depended heavily on the survival of their commanders. In moments of extraordinary bravery, he faced the Persian nobility directly, cutting through their ranks and demonstrating both skill and fearlessness. By the end of the battle, the Macedonians had secured a decisive victory. Many Persian commanders were killed or captured, and the forces opposing Alexander were shattered. The river, once a natural defense, had become the site of Persian defeat, and Alexander's reputation as a bold and brilliant military leader was cemented. This first major engagement in Asia Minor showcased his ability to combine personal courage with tactical ingenuity. He had not only won the battlefield, but had established a psychological advantage that would resonate throughout the Persian Empire. Local cities and satraps, witnessing the Macedonian success, began to reconsider their allegiances. Alexander's campaign was now not just an invasion, but a magnet for those willing to join or submit to the power of a man whose ambition seemed limitless. The aftermath of Granicus revealed Alexander's vision for leadership and conquest. He was not merely a conqueror who sought to destroy. He was a ruler who understood the value of loyalty and local support. Many of the Greek cities in Asia Minor, which had been under Persian influence, were treated with diplomacy and fairness after their surrender. Alexander installed Macedonian governors while respecting local traditions and leaders who chose to cooperate. This approach reinforced his image as a leader who combined fearlessness in battle with wisdom in governance, a rare combination that strengthened both his army and his political position. The victory at Granicus also solidified the loyalty of his own troops. They had witnessed firsthand their commander's courage and strategic brilliance, and their confidence in him was absolute. Alexander understood that morale and personal example were as vital as numbers and tactics, and he continued to lead from the front in subsequent engagements, ensuring that his men followed him not out of obligation, but out of trust and admiration. Thus, the campaign against Persia had truly begun, and the Battle of Granicus marked the first monumental step toward the eventual conquest of an empire. Alexander had crossed not only a river, but a threshold into history, demonstrating that his ambitions were backed by unmatched skill and audacity. Asia Minor was now a theater of conquest, and Alexander's vision of empire, a realm stretching from Macedonia to the edges of the known world, had taken its first tangible form. The young king, barely 20, had proven himself as a strategist, a leader, and a figure destined to reshape the world. Following the decisive victory at the Granicus River, Alexander pressed deeper into Asia Minor, advancing with the confidence of a commander who knew both the strengths of his army and the vulnerabilities of his adversaries. His next major objective was the coastal city of Halicarnassus, a fortified Persian stronghold of immense strategic importance. Located on the southwestern coast of Asia Minor, Halicarnassus was not only a military asset, but also a symbol of Persian power in the region. Its walls were formidable, and its defenders were determined, commanded by Memnon of Rhodes, a seasoned general loyal to Darius III. The siege that awaited Alexander would test not just his tactical skill, but his patience, ingenuity, and ability to integrate diplomacy with military might. Upon arriving at Halicarnassus, Alexander carefully assessed the city's defenses. Its walls were reinforced with stone and towers, and the harbor allowed Persian ships to resupply and escape if necessary. The defenders were confident, believing that their fortifications and naval support would repel the Macedonian forces. Yet Alexander approached the siege with the meticulous planning that had already become his hallmark. He positioned his forces strategically, using both direct assaults and clever engineering tactics. Siege engines, battering rams, and scaling ladders were employed to challenge the city's defenses, while smaller units harassed the perimeter to disrupt communication and supplies. The battle for Halicarnassus was long and grueling. Alexander's men faced not only the walls and soldiers, but also the psychological strain of prolonged combat. Yet he remained at the forefront, personally directing attacks and inspiring his troops through example. His leadership style, bold, hands-on, and deeply strategic, kept morale high and maintained the army's momentum. After several weeks of intense fighting, Memnon recognized the futility of continued resistance and evacuated the city, taking with him a portion of the Persian fleet. Alexander entered Halicarnassus victorious, securing a critical foothold along the coast, and demonstrating his ability to overcome fortified positions with ingenuity rather than brute force alone. The capture of Halicarnassus sent a powerful message. Alexander's campaign was relentless, and the Persian Empire's defenses were not invincible. With Asia Minor largely under his control, Alexander turned his attention northeast, toward the heartland of Persia. The following year, 333 BCE, brought him to a confrontation that would become one of the most legendary battles in history, the Battle of Issus. Unlike the siege of a city, Issus was a vast and open battlefield, where the full strength of the Persian army, personally commanded by King Darius III, awaited. Darius brought a massive force, including thousands of cavalry, infantry, and mercenaries. Confident in his numerical superiority, the stakes were immense. A defeat could halt Alexander's campaign entirely, while a victory promised a decisive path into the Persian heartland. The battlefield at Issus was shaped by geography as much as by strategy. The Pinarus River restricted maneuvering, forcing both armies into a relatively narrow corridor. Alexander used this constraint to his advantage, carefully arranging his troops to maximize the impact of the Macedonian phalanx and his companion cavalry. His ability to read terrain, anticipate enemy movements, and position forces effectively showcased his tactical genius. From the moment the battle commenced, it was clear that Alexander's leadership would be decisive. He personally led the cavalry charge on the right flank, striking directly at the Persian line where Darius was positioned, aiming to disrupt command and morale. The clash was ferocious. Arrows darkened the sky, shields clashed, and the ground shook under the movement of thousands of men. Despite the overwhelming numbers of the Persian army, Alexander's disciplined formations and the unwavering coordination of his troops created opportunities for concentrated attacks. The turning point came when Alexander's cavalry broke through the Persian center, forcing Darius to flee the battlefield in panic. The Persian army, lacking cohesive leadership after the king's retreat, collapsed into disarray. Alexander's forces pursued the fleeing enemy, capturing the king's family, his mother, wife, and children, which further destabilized Persian morale and provided Alexander with both a psychological and political advantage. The victory at Issus was monumental, solidifying Alexander's reputation as a commander of unparalleled skill and courage. It demonstrated his ability to defeat a numerically superior force through strategy, audacity, and personal leadership. It also marked the first time that the Persian king's prestige had been publicly shattered, signaling to the world that the Macedonian king was a force unlike any other. Following his decisive victory at Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander turned his ambitions southward, toward the eastern Mediterranean coast and the rich lands of Phoenicia. This region, encompassing key city-states such as Tyre and Sidon, was strategically critical. Controlling these ports would secure supply lines, protect the flanks of his army, and open the path toward Egypt, a land famed not only for its wealth but for its symbolic and cultural significance. Alexander's approach combined both military strategy and psychological acumen. He understood that the loyalty of cities could be won through either awe-inspiring force or skillful diplomacy. The first major target was Tyre, a heavily fortified island city, with walls rising directly from the sea. Tyre's defenders were confident that their natural and man-made defenses would withstand any Macedonian assault. But Alexander was not one to be deterred by geography or reputation. Employing ingenuity and relentless determination, he orchestrated one of the most remarkable sieges of the ancient world. He ordered the construction of a causeway, a massive land bridge built across the water, connecting the mainland to the island. This engineering feat allowed his siege engines, archers, and infantry to approach the walls directly, a combination of audacity and technical skill that would define many of Alexander's campaigns. The siege lasted months and tested both the endurance of Alexander's army and the resolve of Tyre's inhabitants. The defenders resisted fiercely, employing catapults, missiles, and naval attacks to repel the attackers. Yet Alexander remained undeterred. He supervised every aspect of the operation, personally inspecting construction, adjusting tactics, and motivating his soldiers. Finally, after months of relentless effort, the Macedonians breached the walls. Tyre fell, and Alexander's decisiveness and innovation were immortalized in history. The capture of Tyre secured a crucial port, demonstrated his mastery of both strategy and engineering, and sent a clear warning to other coastal cities about the futility of resistance. Following the success in Phoenicia, Alexander turned his attention to Egypt, a land of immense wealth, ancient culture, and strategic importance. The Egyptians, long under Persian control, welcomed Alexander as a liberator rather than a conqueror. He was hailed as a pharaoh, a leader capable of blending foreign authority with local tradition. Unlike his often brutal conquests elsewhere, Alexander's approach in Egypt was marked by diplomacy and respect for existing institutions, a strategy that ensured loyalty and cooperation. He recognized the importance of symbolism by presenting himself as a legitimate ruler rather than a mere invader. He strengthened his position and secured Egypt without extensive bloodshed. It was during this Egyptian campaign that Alexander founded one of history's most enduring cities, Alexandria. Situated on the Mediterranean coast near the Nile Delta, the city was designed to be both a hub of commerce and a center of Hellenistic culture. Alexander personally oversaw the planning, choosing its location for strategic access to both land and sea, ensuring it would serve as a gateway between Egypt and the broader Mediterranean world. Alexandria's design reflected Alexander's vision of empire, a blend of Greek and local influences, a symbol of his power, and a lasting testament to his ambition. The city would grow to become a center of learning, trade, and culture, far beyond what even Alexander might have imagined during his lifetime. Alexander's actions in Phoenicia and Egypt demonstrated the breadth of his talents as both a military leader and a statesman. In Phoenicia, he showcased his ability to overcome natural and human obstacles through ingenuity and relentless determination. In Egypt, he demonstrated political acumen, respecting local customs while establishing his authority. The founding of Alexandria illustrated his vision for a lasting legacy, not limited to conquest, but encompassing culture, trade, and administration. His leadership style, combining force, diplomacy, and innovation, ensured that these regions were secured, providing vital bases for further campaigns into the Persian heartland. By the end of 332 BCE, Alexander had transformed the eastern Mediterranean landscape. Coastal cities were under his control. Egypt welcomed him as a legitimate ruler, and Alexandria stood as a testament to his ambition and foresight. These achievements were more than territorial acquisitions. They reflected a leader who understood the interconnectedness of military strategy, politics, and culture. Every action, from the audacious siege of Tyre to the founding of a city that would endure for millennia, reinforced the vision of an empire not only conquered, but organized, respected, and immortalized. In these campaigns, Alexander demonstrated the duality that defined his leadership: the ability to wield overwhelming military force while exercising diplomacy, innovation, and vision. By 331 BCE, Alexander's campaign had carried him across the eastern Mediterranean, through Phoenicia and Egypt, and into the heartlands of the Persian Empire. The confrontation with Darius III, the Persian king, was now inevitable. Darius, having regrouped his forces after previous defeats, assembled a massive army that dwarfed the Macedonian contingent in size and strength. Estimates suggest his forces numbered in the hundreds of thousands, including cavalry, infantry, and war elephants, while Alexander's army, disciplined and highly trained, numbered just over 40,000. Despite the overwhelming odds, Alexander's strategic brilliance and audacity ensured that the upcoming confrontation at Gaugamela would become one of the most decisive battles in history. The battlefield near the plains of Gaugamela was chosen by Darius, who sought to exploit his numerical advantage. The flat, open terrain allowed the Persian army to deploy its superior cavalry and war chariots. Yet Alexander, ever perceptive, turned this potential disadvantage into a calculated opportunity. He arranged his forces with the phalanx at the center, flanked by cavalry units capable of rapid movement. His plan was not merely to confront the Persians head-on, but to create openings, exploit weaknesses, and strike decisively at the heart of the enemy line. Alexander's ability to read the battlefield, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and act with precision was unmatched. When the battle commenced, the clash of forces was immense. Persian cavalry and chariots advanced with formidable speed, aiming to break the Macedonian line. Yet Alexander's troops held formation, disciplined and coordinated, executing maneuvers honed through years of training and previous campaigns. Alexander himself led the companion cavalry, striking with targeted precision against the Persian right flank. His personal courage inspired his men, while his tactical insight ensured that every movement was purposeful. The turning point came when Alexander executed a bold oblique advance, concentrating his forces at a critical point in the Persian center. The maneuver directly threatened Darius III, forcing the king to flee in panic once again. The Persian army, lacking cohesive command, fell into disarray, leaving the path to the empire's capitals open. Following the victory at Gaugamela, Alexander advanced into Babylon, one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. Entering Babylon, he was met not with resistance but with awe and admiration. The city's wealth, architecture, and strategic position made it a jewel of the empire, and Alexander treated it with both respect and pragmatism. By sparing the populace and respecting local customs, he secured their loyalty, while demonstrating that his rule combined conquest with order. Babylon became not only a base for further operations, but also a symbol of Alexander's ability to integrate conquered lands into his expanding empire. From Babylon, Alexander pressed on to Susa, another major Persian city. Here, he encountered vast treasures of the Persian kings, including gold, silver, and luxury goods that reflected centuries of imperial wealth. Alexander's capture of Susa was swift and decisive, and he distributed much of the treasure among his soldiers, strengthening loyalty and morale, while also undermining the Persian ruling class. By controlling these economic and administrative centers, Alexander ensured that the backbone of the Persian Empire, the cities, resources, and infrastructure, was now firmly in his hands. The conquest culminated in Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of Persia. This city, a symbol of Persian authority and culture, was known for its grandeur and opulence. Alexander entered Persepolis with a combination of reverence and calculated symbolism. He allowed some preservation of the city's cultural artifacts, while also asserting his dominance, making it clear that the age of Persian supremacy had ended. The fall of Persepolis was a psychological and political blow to Darius III, who continued to flee eastward, but now faced the reality that his empire's core had been irreversibly compromised. These campaigns, from Gaugamela to the capture of Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, highlight Alexander's dual genius, the ability to win decisive battles against overwhelming odds, and the skill to consolidate and administer vast territories once conquered. His victories were not merely military achievements. They were strategic masterstrokes that combined planning, audacity, and diplomacy. By capturing key cities and wealth centers, Alexander undermined Persian authority, while simultaneously bolstering his own legitimacy as the ruler of an empire that now stretched across continents. By the end of 330 BCE, Alexander's reputation as an unstoppable force was firmly established. The Persian Empire, once seemingly invincible, had been shattered through a combination of brilliant tactics, relentless pursuit, and careful governance of conquered lands. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis stood not only as monuments to Persian glory, but also as testaments to Alexander's vision, a world united under his command, where military brilliance and political foresight intertwined to create an empire destined to be remembered for millennia. After the fall of Persepolis and the effective collapse of the Persian Empire, Alexander did not pause to rest. His ambition and vision propelled him further east, into the vast and challenging lands of Central Asia. The territories beyond Persia were wild, rugged, and culturally diverse, encompassing regions such as Bactria, Sogdiana, and parts of modern-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. Unlike the relatively urbanized Persian heartlands, these regions were dominated by mountain ranges, fortified citadels, and fiercely independent local tribes. Here, Alexander faced a different kind of challenge. Not the grand armies of kings, but the guerrilla tactics, elusive leaders, and inhospitable terrain that tested both his military genius and his perseverance. The campaign in Central Asia was marked by a series of complex sieges, rapid marches, and diplomatic negotiations. Alexander had to adapt his traditional phalanx and cavalry tactics to mountainous terrain and narrow passes, where numbers and brute force were often less effective than cunning and flexibility. Cities such as Bactra resisted fiercely, and local satraps relied on the natural defenses of mountains and rivers. Alexander's approach combined relentless assault with strategic patience. He besieged fortified cities with engineering ingenuity, negotiated alliances with local leaders when advantageous, and integrated newly subdued peoples into his growing empire. One of the most famous episodes of this campaign was the conquest of the Sogdian Rock, a seemingly impregnable fortress perched atop a steep cliff. Local defenders believed themselves safe from any assault, confident that the terrain rendered them untouchable. Yet Alexander, refusing to accept impossibility, led a small group of elite climbers to scale the cliffs under cover of darkness. This bold maneuver allowed him to enter the fortress from an unexpected direction, forcing surrender and demonstrating that no obstacle, geographical, tactical, or psychological, could withstand his audacity. Across Central Asia, Alexander combined military skill, courage, and psychological strategy, earning both fear and respect from the local populations. By 327 BCE, having secured Central Asia and integrated its diverse peoples into his empire, Alexander turned his gaze southward toward India, a land described in distant Greek accounts as rich, vast, and full of powerful kingdoms. Crossing the Hindu Kush mountains with his army was an extraordinary logistical feat, testing the endurance, discipline, and loyalty of his soldiers. The journey itself was perilous, with narrow passes, harsh weather, and unfamiliar terrain. Yet Alexander's leadership, personal courage, and unwavering determination inspired his men to follow him into the unknown, forging an army capable of confronting new challenges beyond the known world. Upon reaching the Indian subcontinent, Alexander faced King Porus, a ruler famed for his strength, military skill, and the formidable use of war elephants. The confrontation at the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE became one of the most legendary battles of Alexander's career. The river presented a natural barrier, swollen by seasonal rains, and Porus positioned his forces strategically along the banks, with elephants at the forefront to intimidate and disrupt the Macedonian advance. Yet Alexander, as always, approached the challenge with both audacity and planning. He conducted a daring crossing at night and maneuvered his forces to strike the enemy from unexpected angles, using his cavalry to outflank and his phalanx to hold the center. The battle was intense, with the Macedonians facing the immense power of the elephants, which caused chaos among troops unfamiliar with these massive beasts. Alexander's tactics, however, neutralized the threat. His soldiers remained disciplined, targeting the flanks of Porus's formations and gradually isolating the king's units. At the critical moment, Alexander personally led a cavalry charge that disrupted the central command, forcing Porus to fight directly for his survival. Despite the king's valor, the Macedonians prevailed. Alexander, impressed by Porus's courage and leadership, treated him with respect, reinstating him as a regional ruler under Macedonian authority. This combination of martial prowess and political pragmatism became a hallmark of Alexander's strategy, blending conquest with governance to secure long-term control. The victory at the Hydaspes marked the easternmost expansion of Alexander's empire, extending his influence into regions previously unknown to the Greeks. His army, though exhausted from continuous campaigns across deserts, mountains, and rivers, had demonstrated extraordinary endurance and loyalty. Alexander's ability to adapt to new terrains, confront unfamiliar tactics, and integrate local rulers into his administration ensured the stability of newly conquered lands while expanding his reputation as a commander capable of overcoming any challenge. The campaigns in Central Asia and India reveal the extraordinary combination of qualities that defined Alexander: unyielding ambition, tactical brilliance, courage in the face of danger, and strategic vision that balanced conquest with governance. From the cliffs of the Sogdian Rock to the waters of the Hydaspes, Alexander demonstrated that no terrain, enemy, or obstacle could deter him from his path. By 326 BCE, his empire stretched from Macedonia to the edges of India, encompassing a world of diverse peoples, landscapes, and cultures, all under the command of a young king whose vision and determination would leave a mark on history unparalleled in the ancient world. By 326 BCE, Alexander had reached the Hyphasis River, marking the easternmost boundary of his ambitious campaign in India. After years of continuous campaigning across deserts, mountains, rivers, and unfamiliar lands, his army was exhausted. The soldiers, though fiercely loyal and battle-hardened, had endured hardships beyond what many could imagine: punishing climates, treacherous terrain, and relentless combat against formidable foes such as King Porus and his war elephants. When Alexander proposed advancing further east, perhaps toward the Ganges and territories unknown to the Greeks, the mood among his troops shifted dramatically. The prospect of unknown rivers, vast forests, and powerful kingdoms whose strength they could only speculate about filled the men with fear and fatigue. For the first time, Alexander faced opposition not from enemy forces, but from his own soldiers. The mutiny at the Hyphasis River became a pivotal moment in his career. His men, physically and psychologically at their limit, refused to march further and demanded a return to the west. Alexander, ever the strategist, understood that pushing onward risked the cohesion and loyalty of his army. Reluctantly, he accepted their decision, demonstrating a rare flexibility in leadership. Even the greatest ambition must sometimes bow to the realities of human endurance. Turning back, Alexander led his army along a carefully chosen route through the harsh Gedrosian desert, a journey as perilous as any battle. The desert tested his men's endurance to the extreme, with heat, thirst, and exhaustion claiming many lives. Yet Alexander's meticulous planning, insistence on discipline, and leadership by example allowed the majority to survive. Along the way, he consolidated control over previously conquered territories, integrating local leaders and establishing administrative structures to maintain stability. His return was not a retreat, but a strategic repositioning, preparing for further consolidation and governance of his vast empire. By 324 BCE, Alexander's army returned to Babylon, the administrative and symbolic heart of his empire. The city, which had witnessed his triumphs, became the center of governance, planning, and cultural integration for the sprawling territories under his control. Here, Alexander focused on organizing his empire, instituting reforms, and promoting cultural fusion between Greeks and the peoples he had conquered, a process later called Hellenization. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women, adopted some customs of the conquered peoples, and worked to create unity across his diverse domains. Babylon became both a stage for his power and a laboratory for his vision of empire, a hub of administration, learning, and culture, where the idea of a connected, multi-ethnic realm could take shape. Yet even in Babylon, challenges persisted. Alexander faced internal tension among his generals, the burdens of ruling an empire spanning continents, and the personal strain of relentless ambition. Despite these pressures, his mind remained restless, seeking further campaigns, envisioning expansion into Arabia, the Arabian Gulf, and lands untouched by Greek influence. 323 BCE, at the age of 32, Alexander fell gravely ill in Babylon. The exact cause of his death remains debated. Theories range from fever caused by malaria or typhoid to complications from wounds sustained during his campaigns. Regardless of the cause, the suddenness of his illness brought an abrupt end to the life of a man who had reshaped the known world in just 13 years. Babylon, the city he had so carefully governed and symbolically embraced, became the place where his extraordinary journey concluded. Alexander's death marked not only the loss of a king, but the end of an era. His empire, stretching from Macedonia in the west to the Indus River in the east, encompassed countless peoples, cultures, and landscapes. Without a clear heir capable of commanding loyalty and vision, the empire faced fragmentation. Generals and satraps vied for control, dividing the territories into Hellenistic kingdoms. Despite the political chaos that followed, Alexander's influence endured. Through cities like Alexandria, through cultural exchange, and through the enduring legend of his life, his vision left a lasting imprint on the world. The period from the Hyphasis River to his death in Babylon highlights both the limits and the brilliance of Alexander's ambition. He had reached the edge of the known world, confronted diverse cultures and harsh terrains, and integrated conquered peoples into a vision of empire. Yet his life also serves as a reminder that even the greatest ambition is bound by human limitations. Alexander's death, sudden though it was, solidified his legacy as one of history's most extraordinary figures, a man whose courage, intellect, and vision reshaped the ancient world, and whose story continues to inspire awe thousands of years later.